Hello, my name is Hakon, and today I have another little tutorial for you on the Empress Effects Zoia patchable modular synthesizer and multi-effect stomp box. In my previous episode, which I will link to up here, I demonstrated one method of creating a set of switches so that you can go beyond the 16 channel limit and theoretically create an infinite number of channels for a single input switch. But that was a method that's only suitable for selecting a channel on different switches. Today, as promised in my previous video, I will show you how to have a dynamic input, a variable input, select between different channels of switches so that you can get more than 16. The method I will show you today has a theoretical maximum of 256 channels, which probably is enough for most users. Now, in order to show this to you, I've compressed it all down to a single page, which of course doesn't really demonstrate 256 channels. It only has 12. But the principle is exactly the same, although there are a few caveats, and I'll actually get to those, because if you use more than 3 switches, some things have to be done slightly differently, or there's a little addition you need to do, or rather multiplication, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Now, first of all, what we have here right in front of you is these 3 switches down here are the ones that are linked together, and the shining dot here is the channel that is active at any one point of time. And as you can see, it is selecting a different channel here, and it's only selecting one channel between the whole set of switches at a time, which is the effect that we want. At the moment, the input, the dynamic variable that is selecting the channel, is an LFO that we have up here. So the channel selection is done by an LFO, but the LFO is not connected directly to the switches themselves. It has to go via this switch here, which is what I call the master switch for this patch. And the way this works is that this switch gets the raw input from the LFO. It gets the whole range from 0 to 1 that the LFO is outputting. I'll just show that up on the screen there. And I'll just quickly say how a switch works by a demonstration of this switch here. This switch has 3 channels, which means that it has an input value. I'll just go through that first. An input value, in this case, we just gave it an input value of 1, because when that is passed through, that gives the greatest brightness, so it shows up better when it is passed through where the channel selection is on these switches down here. It could be any value. It could be a dynamic value as well. So whatever value you want to pass through the switch should be connected to this patch point here on the master switch. The channel selection, so the way a switch works is you have a certain number of channels. You have an input that you want to pass through to only one of the outputs on an out switch. Or if it is an in switch, you have 3 inputs. In this case, if you have a 3-channel switch, or a number of inputs, and each one with a different value, potentially. And only one of those values will be passed through to a single output. Out switch, single input, multiple outputs. In switch, multiple inputs, single output. And both kinds of switches have a channel selector, and that's this one here. You can see which channel is selected at any point of time. And the way the channel selector works, it takes a value between 0 and 1, and this is very important later. It doesn't do negative values. It only responds to values between 0 and 1. And when it gets a value and it takes the range of 0 to 1 and splits it evenly between the number of channels. So in this case, we have 3 channels, which means that when the channel selector gets an input value of 0 to 0.33333, it selects channel 1. If it gets the value between 0.333 and 0.6667, it will select channel 2. And likewise, when it gets 0.667 up to 1, it will select channel 3. And so when this is linked to an LFO here that has the whole range from 0 to 1, it will move between these 3 channels relatively evenly. This is a triangular LFO, by the way, in case you wondered. It does go straight up, straight down, straight up, straight down. And you will also see here that this channel lights up at the same time as this input here. This is the value input of the other channels that we are controlling with the LFO. And that is because this channel, so each channel here, the first channel passes through the value from the input to the first of the set of switches. The second one passes through to the second one, and the third passes through to the third one. So the principle of this, it doesn't matter how many switches you have, but of course, when you do it this way, you have up to 16 channels on this master switch, and you can control up to 16 switches with this method without adjusting it any further. Of course, you could conceive of doing this in a sort of a 2-tier way. We have first one switch controlling 2 sets of a switch like this and a set of switches, or 3 or 4 or 5, etc. So it's possible to multiply this up if you absolutely need more than 256 different values or places that are output to, which is a possibility. It's certainly a conceivable possibility. But in most cases, you would be fine with 16 channels, and if you need more than 16, you can get up to 256 with this method. So this channel then selects which of these 3 is active, because only the one that is selected by this switch gets the value output, or the value from this input to the switch input. I hope that is clear so far. Now, the way we need to see this now is we want of course, on this one, the whole range of 0 to 1 is divided between 3 channels. But we want the whole range of 0 to 1 to be divided between the total number of channels. In this case, it is 12. And of course, the only reason it is 12 is because that's what there's room for on a single page. It could have been more than 16, in which case you have to do it. In my case, you don't have to, because you only need 12 positions, but the point is to show how you actually get it to select between the different switches. So the thought process is as follows. You want the first, in my example, with 3 switches, you want the first switch here to get a range of, to respond to the range from the original input of from 0 to 0.333. So the first third in this case, because I have 3 switches. And that third from the LFO should then be multiplied up to become a 0 to 1 for this channel selector. Because for this channel selector to select between these 4 channels, it needs a higher value than the range that is allotted to it from the original switch. And the same with the second switch here. We need this to respond to the value between 0.333 and 0.666. That's when this channel selector should select its 4 channels. And likewise, the third one here between 0.6667 and 1. And the way we do this is, let's see, I'll just show you now. See, the channel selectors here are connected to these value modules over here. And this is also another little trick here. Now, of course, the values we use now depend on the number of channels, the number of switches that we need in total. So if you need 4 switches, you will need to divide the values between 4 switches, you will need a 4-channel master switch, and you will need to use a slightly different calculation here, but the principle is exactly the same. Okay, so let's take the first switch first. We want it to respond to the range between 0 and 0.333. So we don't need to do so much with this because we can basically almost pass straight through the value. So this gets its value from, let's see here now. Now this, the value module here, which works with this switch, gets its value from the LFO output. And it uses actually, it just gets a raw input here from the LFO. But the output here and the connection to the channel input is multiplied by 3. And we do that by having a connection strength of 300%. And of course, it can't be exactly 300%, but it's close enough that it is accurate enough. What that does is it takes the value from the LFO and it multiplies it by 3. And that's what's used as the input for the channel selector on the switch. So when you have a value of 0.333 coming from the LFO, it is multiplied by 3 and it becomes the value of 1. And it will select channel 4. And so the whole range from 0 to 0.333, because it's multiplied by 3, selects channels 1 to 4 on this switch. Of course, if it is higher than 0.333, which it will be for most of the LFO's travel, it is the channel 4 that is selected on the switch. But because once it's past 0.333, the first switch here doesn't get the input from this channel anymore. And so that channel is not active, even though it is selected. I hope that is clear. It doesn't get a value. Nothing is passed through. It has a value of 0 passed through from it because it does not get an input here. And the second switch is the one that takes over after that. So in order to get that, give that value selector, or this channel selector, a value range between 0 and 1, what we need to do is subtract 0.333 and then multiply by 3. Because it's 0, its 0 point, its first channel is supposed to be selected when the LFO gets past 0.333, and that needs to be the 0 point for this switch. And in order to do that, we need 2 modules. So we need the value module, which we have here, which takes the input from the LFO, the raw input from the LFO. Also, there is a value module up here, which has a static value of minus 0.333. So this is a binary, it's bipolar, sorry, it's a bipolar value module. So it goes from -1 to 1. So you need to, when you make the value module, you go in here and you select output -1 to 1 instead of 0 to 1. Minus 3. So that it takes the value from the LFO, subtracts it subtracts 0.333, and so when the LFO is 0.333, it gets 0 in this value module, and that is multiplied again by, I'm pointing at the wrong thing here, the second switch here, and that is again multiplied by 3 for the switch selection, which means that this range from 0 to 1 is going to be selected when the LFO has a value of 0.333 to 0.6667. And once it is past 0.6667, the fourth channel will be selected, but it will not get a value because, again, the master switch is not passing through its value when it is past 0.6667, because then it goes to channel 3 and the third switch. Now, of course, you will realize now how the third switch works. It gets another value module up here, which is also bipolar and which has a value of minus 0.6667. Its 0 point is going to be 0.6667, and then it is multiplied by 3. And so these 4 channels are selected when you get the range 0.6667 to 1 on the LFO. Of course, when these channels are not active, when the LFO is high and is up here, channel 4 is still selected on these channels, but of course it doesn't get an input. And when channel 1 is selected down here, or any of channels on this first switch is selected, technically, of course, these switches have channels 1 selected, because when a channel selector input gets a negative value, it still is on channel 1. So as you can see, it goes down to minus there, and this one goes down even more. So I think that is quite clear. You take the whole range of the LFO and you divide it really in a way between these 3 by creating an offset value with these value modules that go into minus. Now, there is a very important thing to note at this point. What if you have more than 3 channels? If you've done this yourself, you would know that if you go to connection strength now, it doesn't go any higher than 398.1. That is the highest. So I'm just going to go back where it came from now. So what you want to do if you want to say have 10 switches that are controlled by the same method, you would have to have another set of modules to multiply up the value that you need. So for instance, I'll just do a new page here just to show you. Let's say you have the value from the LFO coming in and you want to have 10 switches. So I'm going to make a value module here and a 0 to 1, yeah. So this is the one that gets the value from the LFO, let's say. I'm just going to do that now. I'm going to connect up the LFO like so. And 100%, yeah, that's what we want. And then you want to have an offset. Let's say this is the last switch in the series. So this is switch number 10, which is supposed to be active when you have 0.9 to 1. So I'm going to put in another value module now and make that a bipolar one, minus 1 to 1, and give it a value of minus 0.9, because that is the offset we need. So that means that it will only be a positive value when the LFO is between 0.9 and 1. So, okay. And then I'm going to patch that in there as well. So now we have a value module that only gets goes down to minus 0.9 and up to 0.1. But we need to multiply this by 10 to get the output we want for controlling the whole range of a switch, which is from 0 to 1. So we add more value modules. So I'm going to do another one here. I'm going to patch this in here and give this a connection strength of 200, like so. And the output here goes down to minus 1, and it goes up to 0.2. And we're going to do another value module, as many as needed, depending on how many switches you are actually catering for now. Again, we do a connection strength of 200. I suppose we can round it up this time. So 200.2, and we do one more. Yep, that's fine. And we connect those, and we multiply by 2.5 this time, 250%, like so. And then we should get a value at the end there that is, most of the time, is minus 1. and then it suddenly goes up to 1, and that is exactly what we want. So if we now make a control module, I'm just going to make let's make a switch here. So an out switch, and we're going to give it, let's give it 5 outputs, doesn't matter really. And this is the channel selector, and then the value is connected to, let's see, the value is connected to, I suppose this doesn't really cater for this. I'll just put it, I suppose I need a one more switch really. Okay, so I'm going to put one more, just to sort of show this properly. I need another out switch with 10 outputs. So that's my master switch. And this takes its channel select input from the LFO, like so. And the value of 1. And then we want channel 10 here to give its value to this. Now you can see, because I can slow it down a little bit now. Let's see, slow down the LFO even further, like so maybe. And so when we get to it now, it'll take a little while now. So this is the active, this is switch 10 of a set of 10, if you imagine that. And then you have, oh, this LFO is a bit slow. I'll just move it over here. So we can control it from this page. Speed it up a little bit. Okay, now it's getting to channel, then it's channel 10, and then it starts here and it goes up and it goes down again, and that is the upper 10% of the channel selector that we are looking for. So that's how you can do it with 10 channels. You can do it with up to 16 with this same principle, or technically even more, but then you would have to have a master switch with 2 sub-master switches, and each connected to a set of switches. So not a very complicated patch really, but of course a little bit convoluted to explain, I feel. And let's see, that's the one we want to move back there. Okay, so basically what we're doing, we are first LFO input. In this case, it could be absolutely any variable input, and it has to go then into the channel selector of the master switch, and it selects which part of the whole range of switches. This has the same number of channels as the number of switches you need, and it selects which one is the active one by letting only one switch get an input value, which is the one that comes in here. And then each of the switches has their own channel selector that has to be multiplied up based on the number of switches. So and if you have more than 3, you have to multiply by more than 3, and also you have to set an offset value, which needs to be set in a value module. You would think you would be able to use a bipolar value module here, but that does not work. I've tried that and it just, yeah, that doesn't work, because it seems to, when you have a bipolar value module, it seems to want to take an input CV range from 0 to 1 and convert it to -1 to 1, and so that doesn't work. The only way to make it work is to make a value module that has a value of 0 to 1 and give it an offset, and then it can have a negative value, but it will respond correctly to the input from an LFO, for instance. So I hope that is clear. I think I've explained it reasonably well. If you do have any questions after watching this, please feel free to ask them in the comments. Also like if you enjoy this, share, subscribe, all the usual stuff. I'll see you again next time for more tutorials on the Empress Effects Zoia, which is an absolutely brilliant little thing. When I bought it, I had no idea it was going to be this much fun. So, yes, thanks for watching, and goodbye for now. Bye-bye.